Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Wake Up, Look Up, a podcast where we connect events happening in real time to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm Zach Wyrock. And in today's episode, we're asking the question, can the gospel survive in China? This is prompted by an article I read recently in the Wall Street Journal looking at the increase of persecution in China on evangelical Christians. Recently, Chinese authorities detained Pastor Ezra Jin-Mingri, founder of the Beijing Zion Church, along with many other leaders of what's called the underground Christian church. And what I would call the underground Christian church is the real Christian church in China, the church that preaches the Bible, the biblical gospel, without running it by the Chinese state. Jin's church was one of the largest unregistered congregations in China and had been operating under constant surveillance, but now, of course, gone from surveillance to actual incarceration. China has recently released a new code of conduct for religious clergy on the internet. It bans unsanctioned online preaching and prohibits self-promotion, which is really what we would call evangelism. Many detained pastors now face the risk of indefinite detention and abuse. In fact, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has gone on the offensive, blasting China for their treatment of Christianity. And the Wall Street Journal op-ed I read was actually calling for the Trump administration to do even more public discussion of what's going on with China. But of course, my focus here is more on how we as Christians should think about religious persecution in countries all around the world, including China, and what our role to play in it might be. So let's start here. Persecution, at least when you read the New Testament, is expected. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. And in America, what that has come to mean for many people is that someone might not write Merry Christmas on your cup or might say something nasty about you on the internet. But in countries like China, what that means is if you desire to actually follow Jesus, not just be a Christian in name only, but to actually follow Jesus in the way you live your life, and in particular, how you structure a church and the message you preach, you can expect violence. Just consider what a privileged existence we live as American Christians and how many verses in the Bible get turned into some lower version of what they actually meant. If you're sitting in Beijing and you're a Christian and you're reading 2 Timothy 3:12, that is a palpable verse for you to read, as I'm sure many of those pastors who are currently sitting in Chinese prisons would attest to. But here's the second thing. I actually do think international Christians who don't live in China, play a role here. Hebrews 13:3 says to remember those in prison as though you are in prison with them. I mean, the idea here is that our hearts are actually breaking for our brothers and sisters in prison, that we are praying for them, praying for their release, praying for their safety, praying for the gospel to continue to advance, but not only praying, but also advocating. This is one issue that I don't hear enough Christians talk about in politics. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It doesn't affect our day-to-day lives. As Christians, we have to realize my fundamental allegiance is not to the United States of America, though I love this country. My fundamental allegiance is to the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Those are my people sitting in a prison in China. It has to matter to me. It's something I need to be talking about, something I need to be bringing to the attention of elected officials and of other American Christians. Remember this, too, that one of the reasons the Bible says we should identify with those who are persecuted is because Jesus Christ himself suffered persecution. He says in John 15:20, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Those Chinese pastors have a solidarity with Jesus right now that you and I don't know, because they are fellow sufferers for his message. Jesus cares about them, and so also should we. And keep in mind this, even as we're praying, even as we're advocating, even as we're longing for their release. I know the Chinese government is probably not listening to Wake Up, Look Up, but just in case you are, these attempts to stamp out Christianity never work, and they can never work. Psalm 2 says that the kings of the earth gather together to make their plans against God and against his anointed, his Messiah, Jesus, and he who sits in the heavens laughs. You cannot stop the gospel. Your kingdom is temporary, but Jesus's kingdom is forever. My heart is breaking for these pastors. I am praying for these pastors, and I remain committed, and so should you, at the advance of the gospel around the world, especially in China. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Wake Up, Look Up. If you enjoyed it, please help us get the word out by sharing it with someone you think might benefit from it. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get further content, or even download the CCC app, where you'll find even more resources to help you grow in your faith and relationship with Jesus Christ.